My battalion commander insists on immediate entry.
Ready when you are.
Raid the cellar, plate up the gorgonzola, and hunker down for a long night. It's time for another live edition of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's a touch sardonic perhaps, but not cynical, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Tonight, the international situation is bad, war seems inevitable, unless Styles Council can avoid a China crisis. The Doctor and Joe spend the night together, so you can be sure of one thing, a big bang in the basement. No complications, please. It's Day of the Daleks.
A Steven Moffat script that lifts huge chunks of the time traveller's wife happens like clockwork. The 10th Doctor horses around and puts in the miles in The Girl in the Fireplace.
And the Doctor's wrapped up with some chippy baker foil, while Leela shoots daggers and makes sparks fly. Does anyone know why there's so much badly rendered brickwork in the TARDIS? Derek Deadman tells no tales in The Invasion of Time. Hello, good evening, John.
Hello, how are you, Matt?
I'm all right. I'm actually I should have mentioned this before the show, actually. I'm in day 4 of an absolutely streaming cold here. So our listeners and viewers can enjoy the fact that I'm going to be even more nasal than normal as part of tonight's show, which is something for everyone to look forward to. But other than that, can't complain. How are you, John?
Oh yeah, things are not too bad. Just hot off the...
Yeah. How long ago did you finish watching Invasion of Time?
Roughly 15 minutes ago.
Brilliant. So this
is going to be a sizzling take.
Scorching hot take on some classic Doctor Who.
Just hurt myself on the take.
Well, that's what we're here for. So thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the third live edition of I'll Explain Later, running a week behind initial billing, but thanks everyone for joining us. And yes, we've got 3 episodes of Doctor Who to talk about tonight. I don't think there's any particular link joining these up, unless you noticed anything that you might want to...
Have you invented a catch-all title for this one yet?
No, I absolutely haven't. I'll probably
suggestions very much welcome. Of course, the 3 stories we're doing, Day of the Daleks, Girl in the Fireplace, and The Invasion of Time. So if anybody has a fil conducteur, bit of French there for your Madame de Pompadour fans there.
Oh, nice.
That could sort of link those 3 stories, that would be a great title for the episode. We try to go for a song title for the episodes where we can, but to be honest, any rhyme or reason long since dissipated. Given the frankly arbitrary nature of this podcast now.
Yeah. Well, we haven't quite got down to the sort of latter end of the DVD range where just box sets are being cobbled together out of random titles.
Not quite.
Yes, as always for the live show, the Twitch chat box is open, so please do feel free to follow along, and if you have any thoughts that you want to throw into the mix on any of the stories that we're looking at tonight, we'd love to hear from you. Equally, the fact-checking has been hugely valuable on a couple of previous live streams to cover up for our appalling lack of knowledge on this.
Bearing in mind I finished
to start a podcast on.
Bearing in mind I finished my watching of these about 15 minutes ago, I've done even less research than usual. So the fact-checking and indeed just general pointing in the direction of anything about these stories, as far as they're kind of drifting rootless in time in my mind. They're just things that I've watched.
Yeah,
so it'll be like it'll be like old times, Matt.
Well, the next couple of hours are just going to fly by, aren't they? So, anyway.
Not least for our listeners.
Well, let's kick on then. So the first story that we're looking at tonight is Day of the Daleks, which was broadcast in January 1972. This is Jon Pertwee, the Third Doctor. The action is all set around Alderley House, which is the country residence of Sir Reginald Styles. He is an international diplomat who is on a crucial mercy dash to persuade the Chinese to return to the table for an important peace conference. The international situation is decaying by the day. World War III seems inevitable. But Sir Reginald, whilst working late at night, believes he has seen a ghost try and attack him in his office. Unit is called to investigate, and it soon turns out that a time-travelling trio of assassins are coming back from the far future in order to try and knock Sir Reginald Styles off. Various timey-wimey shenanigans ensue, jumping forward and backwards to a far future Earth where the planet is controlled by the Daleks. Which again, the programme doing that fantastic thing of making a shock reveal of the Daleks being the villains of the piece, despite it being called Day of the Daleks. But anyway, this is sort of... To be honest, I have absolutely no idea what this story's reputation is, but it's coloured for me by the very first edition of Doctor Who magazine I ever bought, which was in 1993, and was reviewing the then very recent BBC Two repeats of Planet of the Daleks, which is the next John Pertwee Dalek story. And it refers to... That review referred to Day of the Daleks as being a bit of a false start, and that Planet of the Daleks constitutes a proper Dalek story. I think that's something that we can sort of discuss, how this holds up as a Dalek story. But the top line question is, John, what did you think of Day of the Daleks?
I mean, I certainly prefer this to Planet of the Daleks.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't think it's a better Dalek story, oddly. The Daleks are almost the least interesting thing in this. Not least as I found out literally but seconds ago that the writer Louis Marks, the script was originally... It didn't include them originally. It was originally just about the Ogrons, who do feel slightly like a spare prick at a wedding in this, but for the fact that I really love them. I think that they're great, and the kind of, the mask is great. Yeah, they look great. I kind of like them lumbering along, and with their sort of Terry Nutkins hairstyle, and they're sort of grunting around and all that sort of stuff. So no, I mean I really like. I mean it's fascinating to draw comparisons between this and the Terminator.
Well, in that they essentially have the same plot. I mean that's
yeah, exactly. And the Terminator is often discussed as being kind of a beautiful example of schlock and a bit of cerebral sci-fi thinking kind of locking into one. And that's kind of where I ended up with Day of the Daleks. I thought there's a really good, solid, central sci-fi idea, how to avert catastrophe, humanity's innate ability to fuck things up, and sort of blunder into the violent tendency that we all have so deep within us, and not actually maybe so deep at all. How misunderstandings, both at the diplomatic level with the summit that's being planned, and also with personal interactions. Like, for example, if Styles was just honest up front about what had happened, things probably would have gone a lot easier. But he was so focused on what he was doing. Similarly, the guerrillas are very focused on what they're doing, and are therefore blind to the fact that they're actors in this time travel, and they're very unaware of how it could be that they are actually setting up the events that lead to the war that they're trying to avert. And the reveal of that by the Doctor with a sudden burst of moral authority is really, really well done.
Oh, it's fantastic, that scene.
Oh, it's brilliant.
When he spits, it's like, you did it yourselves. Yeah. It's like, it's amazing.
The nice close-up on him. By the way, I thought that Paul Bernard did a great job with the direction in this throughout.
Really?
I think it's
really?
it's amazing given
I completely
given how
disagree,
limited.
but carry on.
No, I think given how limited the kind of you've got those locations of basically the house, that tunnel, and the studio work on the future of planet Earth. And there's a bit with that dirt bike and stuff, which is so silly. Episode 2, I will say, drags horribly. There's just all of the oxygen seems to come out of episode 2. But I prefer it that way round. Episodes 3 and 4 then nicely pace up, and you get, as I say, the delivery of that sci-fi idea. Dalek's pretty superfluous, but I really liked how there was a transition from, like, having Styles say he thought he'd seen a ghost in that first bit. It sets it up as a kind of gothic horror, and everyone can slot into that. And there's those bits of gothic horror, like the house, the basement, so on, and then it's allowed to transition into being futuristic dystopian sci-fi stuff later on. And so it manages the fact that you've got to keep people's interest over 4 or 6 episodes, and it's interesting to contrast that with modes,
doesn't it? Yeah,
it's interesting to contrast how successful it is at keeping your attention and your interest versus, say, the Invasion of Time 6-parter that we're going to discuss later. But no, I thought this was extremely strong. I really liked as well the controller character, the kind of, I guess in the Nazi framework he'd be like a Gauleiter, certainly like a sort of a sort of regional boss. And there's a discussion that he has with the Doctor late on where he's sort of talking about the compromises that he's made, how he's probably kept more people alive by collaborating with them, and it forces you as the viewer to think what accommodation you would make in those circumstances. It made me think a lot about the Catholic theologian Thomas Aquinas back in, what was it, the 13th century? Lewis may be listening. Lewis Baston, he'll probably be able to correct me if I'm wrong. But certainly Thomas Aquinas, wrote about the sort of 7 rules of just war, and one of them being that you have to have certainty of victory. So if there is a moral case for violent action, certainty of victory, or the chance of victory, has to be there. And if you are up against an invader where you see no prospect of victory, is it more moral to accommodate and do it the way he does, or to fight despite the hopelessness of it? And obviously he's wrong. Obviously but the fact that it makes you try to see things from his point of view is very interesting. I generally thought this was good, and I just felt that this isn't the best Pertwee story that there is or that we've reviewed, but it's just cooking on gas, and even one that doesn't quite hit the marks. As I say, the pace in episode 2, all the oxygen seems to go out of it. Louis Marks, who also, by the way, wrote Mask of Mandragora, a Tom Baker serial, which you and I
fond of that,
really liked, and also kind of commented had a real Pertwee vibe to it. I understand he also wrote a Hartnell serial, but Terence Dicks, Barry Letts, this setup, the chemistry between. I mean,
it's like Pertwee is absolutely singing at this by that.
Yeah, and the chemistry between the Doctor and Joe is just, and of course the Brigadier, just. It's so lovingly put together, and I just love this era of the show, and I can find lots of reasons to explain why I love it, but it's just alchemy up on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of broadly agree. I mean, I definitely think... I mean, I really like this. I'm not sure if I like it more than Planet of the Daleks, but I have, obviously, that was my gateway to Doctor Who. I have such sort of fond nostalgia. I'm somewhat biased as far as Planet of the Daleks is concerned. But this is really interesting stuff, and it's really interesting to see a Dalek story, or sort of ostensibly a Dalek story, being done in quite a different vernacular to the sort of Terry Nation, David Whittaker sort of version of it, where Terry Nation, I think, obviously what he's doing is continually examining and re-examining World War II from a multitude of different perspectives, through the metaphor of the Daleks. And it's interesting to sort of just step out of that mode of storytelling to do something completely different, which in this case is pretty much one of the only examples in the whole 26-year run of the classic series of a Doctor Who story about time travel. And obviously the series' latter-day preoccupation with time travel under Steven Moffat has sort of prompted lots and lots and lots of sort of debate as to whether or not, Doctor Who is a show about time travel or whether it's a show that should use time travel as a means. And I think that's probably a debate for another time. But this is one of the first times that it really goes in deep on time travel. And I think it does so productively, if only really to give you that perhaps somewhat quite heavily signposted, but that brilliant moment where the Doctor does reveal that, the guerrillas who are going back thinking that they are going to prevent World War III by assassinating Styles are actually about to sort of set it all off. And yeah, you're right, his moral indignation as he sort of gets to spit that line of like, you did it yourselves, is an absolutely fantastic moment. But it does also make you think that there are, actually weirdly, if you are going to do something about time travel, there actually is only a sort of finite number of stories you can tell. And it's interesting that this I've talked about Time Crimes, Spanish film, on this podcast before, which I'm a huge fan of, and a lot of the Moffat stories as well, and obviously Terminator, Back to the Future, all of them sort of revolve around this idea of like, if you go back or forward in time and monkey about with X, what will Y consequence be?
You said monkey. Lewis mentioned 12 Monkeys as well in the chat.
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's a massively good shout in terms of the kind of frenetic, jarring nature of time travel and that sort of... Yeah, I feel there is a bit of that in this as well, that they're confused by... the guerrillas are sort of confused by... They don't actually... It's obviously fascinating to the female commander, whose name I can't remember, but... she's a good character because she's...
Good performance too.
Is a very good performance from the actress, who I will name in a moment. But it's a very good performance because she's authoritative, but she's not entirely certain in a way that's suggestive not of a lack of not a sense of indecisiveness, but a kind of she is interested in intelligent inquiry. It's just that she doesn't always have the time to do that.
No, absolutely, and everyone's working under this pressure cooker situation of sort of multiple deadlines piling on top of each other. But I also think, and I think this sort of comes back to what you were saying initially, John, which is about the sort of moral dimension of it, and I sort of think of sort of a point that's been made a few times really about sort of the Nazis, and obviously the Daleks are the Doctor Who's Nazi allegory, sort of writ large, and so I made a program for BBC4 a few years ago about British war movies, and one of the things that we talked about was how the Nazis in so many war movies became almost sort of like cartoon villains and quite far removed from what they actually were and did as being real people, but almost in a sense the point that was sort of made in the program was that the Nazis represent this such a sort of moral singularity, that they are so unquestionably evil that they simultaneously become... They are cartoonish by virtue of the fact that everything that they were looking to do was so unquestionably evil, rather than just a sort of, politics gone wrong or something like that. And the interesting thing about this setup is that with the Daleks at the top of the food chain and the Daleks sort of so unquestionably evil, it allows space for everyone else to be painted in multiple shades of grey. And so,
we discussed the controller, but that extends all the way through to the guerrillas as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Everyone is doing what they think they need to do. just in case people haven't watched this, there aren't a load of gorillas No.
A load of apes wandering around.
There's the
I think this is wild King Kong Dalek mashup, which sounds awesome, by the way.
Yes. No, we're using the term in the guerrilla sense. Although there are large apes wandering around in this as well, just to confuse things.
That's true. Although I didn't watch the special edition version, Matt. So perhaps there are huge lumbering apes scaling buildings
just
in there.
Randomly put in CGI. Well, we'll get onto the special edition and my thoughts thereon shortly. But everyone is basically allowed the sort of moral ambiguity to be sort of doing what they feel they need to do in that situation, and some of them are more right than others. So the controller has obviously made the decision that it's in his interest to collaborate with the Daleks, but he's trying to undermine them where he can. The gorillas, are obviously against the Daleks, but are,
and he's rationalised that a bit too neatly as well.
He has.
It's beautiful because there is a kernel of truth that you do see it from his point of view, but he's so turned that into a carapace of he's rationalised it so much that it's too
he probably
cute,
believes his own bullshit really at that point as well.
Yeah.
And then you have, like the actual resistance people that you see little glimpses of, like the prison guard who tries to give the Doctor a chance to escape when he's taken in the far future setting. And so it's interesting by having the Daleks in it, but not actually having the Daleks constantly front and centre throughout. And, this may well just be a function of them literally only having 3 Daleks to play with, and one of them being spray painted a different colour. So there's a sort of limit to how many Daleks you can actually portray on screen at any one time. It allows everyone else to come across sort of a bit more rounded and interesting, and that as a sort of engine that completely drives the plot is really good. Whereas I say, obviously, I think Terry Nation is underrated as an ideas man. I mean, I think a lot of his writing is actually quite pedestrian, but I think we've discussed this past, but the number of different, how far he is able to take that World War II allegory, which he wants to explore across multiple serials, is amazing, and I think quite often goes to some quite sort of sophisticated places. Where I think his writing often comes down is that he gets bogged down into these sort of fairly standard kind of quest narratives. But this manages to sidestep all of that. So I think basically all the stuff that this is trying to do I really like, and there's bits of it that absolutely sing. We can come on to some of our Pertwee greatest hits from this shortly. My main problem with it is that actually I think this is actually quite poorly made. It seems to be. It's interesting actually watching the DVD extras. Everyone puts the boot into director Paul Bernard, like Barry Letts and Terence Dix. Spare absolutely nothing about saying that he was a director who didn't really understand what he was doing and was just like get it in the can. And none of the actors have got anything good to say about him, which is sort of interesting. That I quite liked
the direction. I think maybe it was all done in the edit. I don't know how that was put together, but. There was some brilliant framing. I mean, I just love it. Perhaps it is quite Route One, but like the very first bit where Stiles said, it's like he'd seen a ghost, and then there's immediately the close up of the unit telephone, and it's ringing, zoom, right, we're in now. This has gone to the Brigadier. It's going to happen. I thought there was quite a bit of that kind of landed quite well. I guess some of it is more to do about the script and the cuts that it forces on the director. But also, like, I just love the bit of business with what is the presenter Alex McIntosh.
Oh yeah,
and that's something they also do in The Demons, where there's a sense of how the media are covering this as well, which feels very RTD as well.
There's a sense that
this
is sort of meant to be happening in our world. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's like I think there are bits of that, and there are definitely ideas as to where it goes.
It's probably in the writing, though. Let's be honest, right?
I mean, I think it almost is all in the writing. I mean, I just think even just sort of some of the editing where shots just seem to have been sort of bulked together, or little things. I mean, just sort of minor technical complaints, but things like when you see the reprise of the cliffhanger at the beginning of episodes 2 and 3, and you hear the Doctor Who theme music, and then suddenly it's cut off because they hadn't got a clean mix of the audio to reuse for the cliffhanger the following episode. It's just all it's all to me it feels, and bear in mind, I actually really highly rate a lot of the direction and production of this season. I think particularly, they get a lot of mileage, I think, out of the making the show predominantly Earthbound from a production point of view. It just feels to me just rather sort of slackly put together. But this does perhaps bring us on to the special edition, which is not something we're going to spend too much time talking about. But I also want to say, just having criticised, the way this looks or it puts together, so there's a special edition version on the DVD which replaces most of the effects with CGI. I think it re-edits a lot of the fluff lines. The famous Ogron saying...
Of which, actually, there are loads.
There are loads of
it's
fluff
really
lines.
noticeable how many fluff lines there are in this. I don't much care about fluff lines. It doesn't... I don't bump against them as badly as some people, but it was really noticeable that... You're quite right, actually. In an era of Doctor Who that I think is absolutely nailed on, galvanised, belt and braces with varnish and everything. It's just it's watertight. It's noticeable that there are quite a few fluff lines in this.
Some of which I think is attempted to be ironed out in the special edition, but my God, I think that the special edition is
when
misguided.
was that done?
It's maybe about 10 years ago, I think. And it's one of those things where, because I've seen lots of sort of attempts at recutting classic Doctor Who to see, like, could you make it pacey and modern and those kind of things, and it's just one of those things of, like, when you start going into TV that was made with a completely different vernacular and try to fix it almost, it just doesn't work. And so in a way, rather than tidying up a lot of the problems, I mean, and yeah, there are things like the way they're able to cheat a few more Daleks into the shot and the final assault on the house is quite, maybe ups the scale a little bit, but it doesn't really feel that much more sort of grandiose than what we get in the actual thing. But it's sort of interesting that once you start trying to go in and fix a lot of these problems or perceived problems with a piece of TV that's 30, 40 years old, you end up creating a whole load of new ones, because then the disjunct between the slightly sort of cheap CGI that they slather over the top of it, and then
it's really poor.
Yeah, but weirdly, that's the version that is on BritBox. So if you're streaming,
well, that's
Doctor
what I was
going to
say.
We may be the only people streaming Doctor Who from BritBox. I'm not sure, John, but it's quite surprising that the special edition is the only one there.
I don't think we are the only people by any stretch. I think a lot of people, that's the main, indeed only justification. I think there's quite the Venn diagram of people who subscribe to BritBox for Doctor Who and Inspector Morse is probably pretty much an overlapping circle. But for the BritBox thing, indeed, you're quite right. It's only the special edition, and because that's the case, Matt very helpfully and obviously entirely legally
provided you
made available.
The original. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Provided me a chat with a brown envelope arrived, and anyway, no questions were asked, but money was exchanged. Anyway, so I got a hold of this original version. I was watching that, and for whatever reason, the feed of it wasn't working for a little bit. So I thought I'd chance my arm with the BritBox version. I was really taken aback by just how shoddy and how out of it that CGI takes you. I mean, there's the bit that is the very first episode. No, it must be episode 2. No, it's episode 1, where you first see the controller, and it, rather than just going straight to the controller, it kind of shows you this dystopian vision with a kind of dark skyscraper and this kind of green fog, as if a particularly flatulent Viz character had just passed through. It's just terrible, and and even with that, they hadn't managed to cut out the controller moving his automatic chair with his feet by himself. It's I can't disagree with some of the production points in the original that you mentioned, but the special edition certainly does nothing to
help it
make that better, really.
So 2 points I basically want to raise. I'll do them in this order because sort of aware that we've got plenty of other Doctor Who to talk about tonight. But one we have often praised the Pertwee era of Doctor Who for having that sort of 5 minutes into the future sort of feel about it, and how a lot of the stories channel the concerns of the day, the issues of the day. It feels like a lot of inspiration is ripped from the headlines. This sort of goes.
Where
a lot
are you going
further.
with this?
Well, no, I'm actually just going to ask the question as to like the international politics of this has come in for some criticism in the past as being quite sort of broad brush, but it's interesting that this does go for sort of international diplomacy all breaking down. It's not so contained to just a sort of government department in the southeast of England or something. There's an attempt at a big international scale to this, and if the Chinese don't turn up at this peace conference, everything's going to pull out. You get all the ambassadors turning up or the diplomats all turning up in their little cars at the end for the peace conference. What do you make of that? Did that sort of ring? I don't want to say ring true, because I think there are limits to that. But how did that sit with you?
Yeah, so it's. I mean, it is an interesting time, because obviously it was in 1972. The year this was broadcast, that Nixon went to China, which, as fans of Star Trek VI will remember, is an old Vulcan proverb. Only Nixon could go to China. So that sense of, we have to remember that this was, that the Vietnam War was still ongoing, and there were, fears over the role of that conflict as a proxy conflict that could lead to a wider conflagration. The courting of China by Nixon, of course, takes some of that risk and some of that heat away from the situation, and things were moving in that direction by 1972. Obviously, the situation in Vietnam continued to deteriorate longer than that, and 73 through 75 is kind of when things. Well, anyway, we could discuss the Vietnam War for a long time, but things were, it was still in a high combat phase and so on. And Nixon going to China, which happened, later that year, was very important. This was broadcast in January 1972. So obviously that was a very, very important moment. I don't think that this serial is latching on to. I mean, people talk about, you're seeing people criticize the vagueness of it. I think that vagueness to us now probably looks a little bit sort of, so there's just going to be a massive nuclear war between all that. But this was 10 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Jesus, yeah, of
the
course.
Vietnam War is ongoing. People are worried about it as a proxy conflict. Could it bring in China, the USSR, and the US into direct conflict? The energy crisis will brew and come to a head in the next 18 months. This is a period of major multipolar superpower. It's a powder keg, and so it might seem rather ill drawn now, but
people would have related to that sort of general air of like this could kick off at any point.
Sure. Yeah. As the backdrop to this sci-fi story, it's a completely plausible thing. I don't think, it's very easy from the kind of post-Berlin Wall mindset. And by the way, we've got plenty of our own fault lines in the 21st century that would perhaps seem basic background for a story now that maybe in 30 years people go, well, that sounds a bit vague, Homeland, this whole series about Islamic fundamentalism, what's that all about? It's like, people might look at that in 30 years and go, what the hell was that all about? I think of the time, the broad brush nature of that is not a problem. It's a route one to a set of concepts and a way of thinking about the world. And also, I think it's brilliant that in a children's television show, you're still talking about international summits and the power of diplomacy. It's fascinating as well to see that at this summit that is so important to the future of humanity, yes, the Brits and the Americans and the Chinese are there, but an African nation is represented as well, arriving at the conference. It sort of speaks to a future where that kind of, African nations would be at the top table. It's just a little beat, and I don't know who threw it in there, but it was a good thing to see that there was a sense that this was a global crisis and that all parts of the globe had to be represented there. It kind of upped the ante, and it just gave it a kind of, I don't know. I think there's something about this era where just things are thought through a bit more. And I agree with you. Now you talk about it, some of the direction is not quite where it should be. Some of the dialogue, by contrast, Pertwee having a go at the unimaginative nature of the military mind.
Yeah.
Discussing the merits of Styles' cellar with a beautifully stylized red wine bottle.
Oh yeah, so we're gonna talk about
banging on about the Gorgonzola.
Yeah, the Doctor getting
I'm there all day
pissed
for that
up
stuff.
in the. It's interesting
and Joe, who's wearing a pleasingly short skirt for the male audience, as was obviously the taste and the mores of the time. She's
Smooth
allowed
recovery.
to become much more than just a bit of totty.
100%.
She's there recognising the dematerialisation circuit. She's helping out with the experiments at the beginning. She's absolutely in lockstep with the Doctor. They are a team, and he respects her judgment and what she brings to the party, and it's real chemistry there.
So on the DVD extras, a lot of time is spent discussing, the fact that obviously you see the Doctor chugging back a fair amount of alcohol in episode 1, which is not something that you sort of see terribly often. And I don't think it's a particularly interesting route to go down, this sort of inquiry of like, does the Doctor drink? Should the Doctor drink? Blah, blah, blah. But I find it interesting that I see it more as a reflection of how in command of his performance Pertwee is, and how you totally buy Pertwee as the Doctor, that all of the sort of the broader affectations, I mean, yes, you wouldn't really imagine like Troughton doing that, would you? But you can totally see Pertwee as the bon vivant, sinking a nice bottle, where he has the opportunity to do so. And
a good-humoured wine, he describes it as.
Yes. And the fact that he can sort of bring that so seamlessly to the Doctor, and it doesn't really stand out, even though there are plenty of other incarnations of the Doctor where it would be thoroughly out of sorts or out of keeping. I just think is a perfect indicator of how he's got this character on lock at this point. It's for all that. Sort of. I think some of the other Doctor Who actors always used to hate the fact that he would turn up at conventions in full costume and shout "I am the Doctor" to the baying crowd. It's like I kind of think he was like he had this on lock at this point.
Pertwee is the Doctor.
There's no doubt at all, though, that the Daleks were the most popular of all the Doctor Who monsters, and they have the habit of turning up in the most unexpected places. For instance, in December, Dalek is going all the way up to Scotland to Strathclyde University to take part in a lecture that's being given there by Professor Clark. But ever since the Daleks disappeared from Doctor Who, people have been begging for them to come back. There have been literally hundreds and thousands of letters with people saying, can't they please come back and have another memorable battle with the Doctor? So, who knows, perhaps if enough people write and ask the Doctor Who programme if the Daleks can come back, you never know, in the next Doctor Who adventures, the Daleks may well be there. Come in and rescue me, you two.
Come on, Chef. We're surrounded. Well, we'll be back again on Thursday, and we'll be having Fusilier Reid in the studio, and he is Britain's balloon jumping champion.
Right, so we are jumping forwards now several decades to May 2006 to the David Tennant story, The Girl in the Fireplace. This was the 4th episode of David Tennant's first season, written by Steven Moffat, the second script that Moffat wrote for the series. And in it, the Doctor and his companions, Rose and new recruit Mickey, end up on a space station it's the 51st century, isn't it?
That's right.
It's established as the 51st century, and they find out that this space station has multiple time windows throughout, which lead onto the same palace at Versailles. In pre-revolutionary France, but at different points throughout the life of one Renette, aka Madame de Pompadour. The Doctor, in stumbling through these time windows, ends up imprinting himself at various points in her life, visiting her throughout her life as she grows old, and he continues to not age, as she keeps pointing out to him. A sort of quasi romance ensues but the Doctor is also trying to work out why she's being bothered by a number of clockwork robots who are determined to pitch up at the right moment in her life to harvest her for parts to fix the broken spaceship. This widely regarded as... Yes, makes perfect sense when you put it like that, doesn't it? Widely regarded as a bit of a classic in a series that lots of people, I think, are fairly ambivalent
Mixed views about it, aren't there? There's mixed views about this series.
Opening David Tennant season. I'm sure we'll come on to that and discuss why. But this is probably also the script that kind of announced that Steven Moffat scripts in Doctor Who were going to be an annual fixture that would be doing something a bit different that people would look forward to. It maybe nailed down the sort of the essence of the Moffat style. I've not actually watched this since it went out in 2006, so I'm revisiting this some years on. But I'm going to ask you first, John, what did you think of The Girl in the Fireplace?
Well, interesting that you should mention, obviously, a hugely important point. Steven Moffat's kind of, he had done that two-parter in
The Empty Child.
Yeah, but I think this one kind of this one really cements that it wasn't a fluke. I suppose that there was something special about what he was bringing to Doctor Who, and I think it's interesting actually that we were looking for a running theme through the three stories. I suppose.
Oh, you found one.
The first story, Day of the Daleks, that we reviewed, is one of the rare examples in the classic series of time travel being an important aspect of the plot. Indeed, there's that lovely scene at the beginning where the Doctor and Joe walk in on Doctor and Joe.
Yep.
Which is the kind of thing I'd probably roll my eyes at in the Matt Smith era, having seen that kind of bollocks been done time after time, timey-wimey after timey-wimey.
Yep.
But it's quite sweet when they do it. In the Pertwee scratching his head, bit difficult to explain, chap. But yeah, so there's that, and of course the Invasion of Time is nominally about the importance of control over time travel. So I suppose there's your running theme that we've
nice.
retconned onto this. But this, The Girl in the Fireplace, is just so nicely. It's a lovely bit of telly. It's a really, really lovely bit of telly, and obviously much has been boringly, and I think people have looked too much into the burgeoning romance between Sophia Myles at the time and David Tennant, as if they were going, we're watching their romance blossom on screen. It's like, they are actors.
We did the same with an actor playing his daughter 2 years later. So.
Right? I mean, they are actors, and decent ones at that.
Good ones.
I think they could have probably brought it without there being actual oxytocin and testosterone thrown into the mix. So yeah, I think, but they do bring it with those performances. You do care about this French courtesan, and her, the fact that she has to take as she describes it, she's stuck on the slow path.
Yeah.
Having to progress one day at a time. And, although she's regularly referenced as a keen intellect and someone of incredible prowess and power, and, there's nonetheless that sense that, she can't be queen, she has to be the mistress. She can't lead in her own right. She can't take a leadership position in her own right. She's stuck in that time. Going at her own pace, stuck on the slow path, while the Doctor can swan in, and I think it's quite. It sort of suggests a kindness and a depth to her soul that she doesn't resent him more for that. she's sad about it, but she doesn't really resent him for it, which is just, it's very interesting. It speaks well to her. The Doctor is so obviously beguiled by her. A wonderful bit of acting from David Tennant, and there's such fun up on the screen. You know, a horse on a spaceship larking around. You know, a swinging around fireplace like a. You know, like one of the better games on the Crystal Maze. You know, the whole thing has this kind of one of the better games on the Crystal Maze feel to it.
That's really true. I love it.
I'm the Doctor, and I just snogged Madame de Pompadour as he spins round on the firecase. You know, the eye on a stalk and the beating heart that's wired into the thing, and you know the kind of badinage between them all. And
there are so many great zinger lines in this. Like the one I noted down was, obviously the I'm the Doctor and I just snogged Madame de Pompadour is a great one. But also when Mickey says, "What's a horse doing on a spaceship?" and the Doctor replies, "Mickey, what's pre-revolutionary France doing on a spaceship?" Which really made me laugh.
Get some perspective.
Such a good line.
Yeah, and I did really like as well the kind of the subtly played jealousy that you know, when Mickey reminds, oh well, Madame de Pompadour, Sarah Jane Smith, you know, your Doctor gets about a bit, doesn't he? Cleopatra, and she said he mentioned Cleopatra once, but he called her Cleo. It's just like, and it's just, which obviously in, you know, to a British ear certainly, you know, makes you think of Carry On Cleo as well. So it just immediately snaps you into
you're in a much saucier world here.
Yeah, right. I know. So yeah, I think this is great. It's a wonderful bit of fun. It plays on the loneliness of Madame de Pompadour. I already talked a bit about her, you know, the position in history and the limitations of being a woman at that time, no matter how accomplished you were. A lot on the Doctor's loneliness as well. You know, that point in the mind meld where she turns it back on him and says, "Oh, you know, there's a moment where you can't quite gather whether it's her or him that she's talking about, and it is him, the lonely child, and the loneliness there." And something that Moffat plays with a lot, the fact that children don't need to be told about monsters. They know there are monsters under the bed, right? They just do. Yeah. They quickly latch onto the idea of monsters, even if they haven't thought about hairy, lumbering things with big claws and big teeth. They just know about monsters. It's almost like it's hardwired into our brains at some sort of primordial level that we need to be scared of things that go whirr. Those monsters are there, and you know, it's a bag of tricks we're very familiar with now. But the bit where he sees the child, Renette, and says to stay on the bed in the middle, don't hang your feet over the sides, because we all know there's monsters under the bed. You know, it's a bag of tricks, as I say, we're familiar with now, but it's really well done. It's going to have the kids in the audience thinking about whether there is a clockwork carnival goer under their bed when they go to bed. All that stuff about the monsters and the Doctor, where there are monsters, there will be the Doctor. That there is where there is darkness, and there is darkness, there will be light. There is someone who can, you know, help you out in situations like that. I think it's that thing of you know, given free rein in the as he is when it comes to the Matt Smith era. I feel like if you raid that kind of box of tricks too much, it becomes diminishing returns. But to see it in this context, I mean, just it's a little it's a little pearl, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think this is absolutely fantastic. I think it's sort of weirdly, it sort of forms a piece with Blink in the way that it sort of tees up what he's good at, and Moffat, this is what Moffat's good at, and what, you know, where things don't quite work for me in his tenure as showrunner. That, you know, when he's crafting these sort of 45-minute pieces, which, you know, you can, if you basically take this and Blink, you basically have most of the preoccupations that he sort of pursues for his tenure as showrunner. But as these sort of completely self-contained, and I mean, even down to how, there's the last tailing mystery as to like why, and that, the Doctor never gets to the bottom of why the robots on this spaceship are stalking Madame de Pompadour, and it's just in that last frame as the ship's turning that you realise that the ship is called Madame de Pompadour, or the SS Madame de Pompadour, which is obviously why the robots have got it in their head that they need her brain to power it. It's the...
Sure.
Yeah, sure, why not? But... It's just so perfectly paced that, even up to the final frames of the episode, the last pieces...
Because they can fix their ship with human body parts, but they can't work out that that's a really dumb thing to do.
I mean, yes, okay, there's a limit to how closely you can sort of examine the intelligence or the
Oh, no,
sense this made. No, it's possible to know.
As I've said a million times before, if it gets you narratively, if it gets you emotionally, if it feels truthful... You dance over those things.
Totally.
Where it clunks as drama, and we'll perhaps discuss that in the Invasion of Time segment. But where it clunks as drama, then you begin to nail down on. But why did he?
Hang on a minute. It's like a minute. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it sort of buys itself so much leeway, and I mean, it's also. I mean, it is interesting to see just how many of the sort of later preoccupations are set up and established here. So. You have, which to be fair, we also had in The Empty Child the previous season, that the idea that this is a system playing itself out logically without human intervention, which is why that's happened. Tick. You have,
yes, they're not. It's not a directly malevolent force.
No,
is it?
it's
just
not
like they're rubbing their hands together and sort of snarling and laughing.
It's a logic system that has just wobbled out of control somewhat.
Yeah.
So there's that preoccupation, which he returns to again and again. Absolutely tick. The Doctor imprinting himself on someone in childhood, which is obviously what he does to Amy. I mean, even down to the sort of. I mean, I don't know if you want to go there with the sort of women in Moffat scripts who discover that their childhood imaginary friends are real and therefore want to shag them. I mean, that seems to be something that he returns to. The woman who knows him.
How do you suppose that works out for him as a pulling technique?
Well, I mean, he's 2 on 2.
In the
really,
post-Utri era, I would imagine that
yeah.
that's not really. You can't just climb up a drain pipe. Go into a kid's bedroom and I'll pop back 20 years later. And I'm not saying that Moffat was doing that, by the way. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. I'm just saying he was hanging around the BBC. He probably did know people who maybe did do that. Maybe that's where the. No.
Have you got any more of this train of thought, or can I carry on?
I think I've lawyered this in my brain, and I think it's fine.
Fair enough. But you've also got you've got the woman who knows him, the Doctor on a deeper level than he's quite comfortable with, which obviously you get with River Song later. It's all there, and it is played out to less compelling effect later on. But yeah, here it doesn't matter, and it's interesting as well that. Drawing a line between this and Day of the Daleks, in terms of like the show going, hard in on let's do something about time travel now. What that is, that in ripping off some sort of classic or some literary time travel sci-fi. I mean, obviously, Day of the Daleks. We probably didn't mention this, but Day of the Daleks and the Terminator, I think, clearly have their roots in Harlan Ellison's writing, and I believe Harlan Ellison took legal action against James Cameron for Terminator, didn't he? I could be wrong on that. Maybe someone will answer that in the Twitch for me. But here, what Moffat is going for is the time traveller's wife. I mean, obviously we snarked on that slightly in the intro to this episode. But again, it's that idea that it's not necessarily sort of... Well, no, I guess it is hard sci-fi in terms of like it looking at the consequences of time travel, but with that sort of romantic overlay to it, which is something that he does again and again. Really, that he's never sort of just so empirically interested in the ins and outs of time travel, or at least not so much. But there is this sort of romantic overlay that he sort of wants to put on it as well. So what, like,
I was fascinated to read the Wikipedia page as you're droning on. No, I find it really... I mean, it says a lot, I think, about the kind of alchemy here. I mean, you've got Russell T Davies and Moff. And apparently this is an idea by Russell T Davies, or at least the idea that there would be a romance between the Doctor and Madame de Pompadour. Indeed, I was reading here about, which does bear a lot of further reading, that actually there was apparently at the time a Clockwork Man who played chess called the Turk, which was later revealed to be a hoax. I'm guessing it was,
It's man in a box, yeah.
A man with some cogs strapped to him. But still, that's the kind of it feels like a very Russell T Davies kind of would imagine Madame de Pompadour and the Doctor and a Clockwork Man, and then get them together and something brilliant will happen.
Go for it.
And I can I can imagine. It's just there's something about, again, it's a bit like that. That Pertwee era, there's something about the excitement. There's an excitement and a sense of fun that's all over the screen with this era of Doctor. And I don't much like, by the way, Series 2, because I think the whole kind of that smugness of the relationship between the Doctor and Rose.
Yeah.
The idea that they're kind of riding for a fall. I get that's what it's aiming for, but it just... It especially later in the season, it just gets so wearying.
Yeah, it's a bit overlaid.
Yeah.
Or overworked.
But even then, there's just a sense of fun and adventure and freshness, and it's a bit unfair to compare the later series of the run with this, because obviously there was that loaded expectation on it. It was only just back. It was still fresh. It was new. The next time segment is the reintroduction of the Cybermen, and we'll discuss that at another time.
It's
but
also interesting to sort of remember, it was only really sort of later in this series that I remember thinking, actually, I'm not sure if this is particularly this is definitely not as good as last year's, but it comes as the third story in a pretty stellar run of like Tooth and Claw, which we've looked at before as a sort of just like all out badass history werewolf one. That's a kind of all actioner, and I think that's great fun and works really well. School Reunion, which is brilliant, and we've discussed that before, and then this. And that's sort of three really...
Well, yeah, I mean, it did start with New Earth, but...
It did start with New Earth, yeah, but that's true. But, that's a 3-episode run of, like, I think they are definitely all-timers, certainly for the Tennant era. And then it all sort of slightly tails off. What do you make of David Tennant in this? I mean, you've sort of praised his performance. I sort of think that one of the things that I find a little tricky about this season is that I think after a really confident start in the Christmas Invasion, he does take a little bit of time to sort of find his stride on it, and I think it's not helped by they do a lot of things to sort of mess around with the character throughout this season while he's still finding his feet. So him reverting to doing the Scottish accent in Tooth and Claw. And then putting him alongside, I was quite surprised that the series went so heavily down, bringing back elements from the classic series as they did, like with episode 3 of the School Reunion. And then obviously later you got the 50s episode where he changes up his look, and, there are various things that they're doing. Oh, and obviously in his first episode, he's possessed by Cassandra for part of it, so he's acting sort of quite out of sorts. So, I think in general he's finding his feet with it in this season, and he's not helped by a number of scripts that give him things that sort of throw off him finding a groove with it. There are bits of it. I mean, I think he's absolutely brilliant in the stuff with Sophia Myles in this, and then there are other bits where I'm sort of not so sure. But what do you make of Tennant in this?
No, I think that's actually a fairly sound. I mean, he's a brilliant performer. He's authoritative, and he embodies the Doctor, I think, brilliantly. I agree with you that there are times when I'm sure David Tennant is not lazy, but it feels lazy to watch when it's especially the kind of, oh, you're brilliant, all that kind of stuff. It just feels so by numbers. The stuff with as you say, with Sophia Myles is great. The stuff where he is having to react to her talking about his loneliness. The bit where he realizes that she's died. There's a wonderful bit where the king says, "What did she write?" and he just puts it in his pocket, and it's a wonderful sense of just how private a man he is. When he gets back in the TARDIS and Rose asks, "Are you all right?" and he says, "I'm always all right." And it floored me. I mean, because this is a man who's so fucking English, in that sense of binding everything up inside himself. He won't allow himself to say, "No, I'm lonely, I'm hurt, I can't," and it's desperate to watch, perhaps especially in an era. I mean, this was 2006.
2006.
We're even now much more open about mental illness or depression or sadness or things that we're going through in our lives.
Yeah.
Some will say for better, some will say for worse. I would say for better. But the fact that he just binds this all up inside himself is so painful to watch, and it's not all there in the script. It's there in the script, but he brings it. For me, it's the kind of Doctor larking about. It's when the Doctor is called upon to be very Doctorish. He doesn't quite land it yet. Like, oh, brilliant! Oh, a clockwork person! Oh, it's. Yeah, I grate it against. It grates for me a little bit too, but I just think that there's so much he does do in this episode where he brings the performance of high quality. He's one of the very best actors to take the role. He
really is. And I guess just to round it out as well. I mean, to maybe finish up where we started, talking about Steven Moffat a little bit, because obviously we have given. Well, actually, not in the last few episodes. We've been quite complimentary about Moffat in the last few, but it really is a reminder that, I mean, obviously we've talked about how sort of tightly constructed this is, and how that really works for for evoking his particular kind of preoccupations as a writer. But one thing I've always said in the stories, which I don't particularly like, is command of an image, like to show you something that you have not seen before, and that really stops you in your tracks, is incredible. And this is full of it. I mean, you've got the clockwork robots, which are amazing to look at. I mean, actually, like really beautifully designed with all the little cogs, and even like the the blades that shoot out with the little whirry bits on. They look fantastic.
Yeah.
But then you've got the horse on the spaceship. And then, like you say, you've got the eye in the camera and the heart sort of down the thing, and and then Versailles as well, which is sort of an incredibly sort of opulent location. The costumes, and it's like
some proper actual laughs as well, like proper. I mean, I really did laugh when the clockwork robots have got Mickey and Rose tied up, and she's trying to say, "Oh, the Doctor's going to come and get you," and you know what the Daleks call him? And then he rolls in drunk, and she says, "Look what the cat dragged in, the oncoming storm." It's just so funny. And then he just goes straight back with, "Oh, now you sound like your mother." It's just, it's beautiful.
The horse coming through the mirror was the hardest thing to achieve. And for the very first draft, you sit there going, "Oh my God, a horse comes through a mirror. How do we do that?
How do we do this then?"
The Doctor on horseback, bursting through a mirror into a ballroom.
Easy. You said it was easy, Dave.
There are 100 practical things that you have to think about. Can you take the horse into a ballroom?
Okay, and then for our final story tonight, we are talking about The Invasion of Time. Which is the final episode, final story of Tom Baker's third season. So we're talking season 15 here. And this was broadcast February to March 1978. And it's sort of a loose sequel to The Deadly Assassin, which is something that I wasn't quite anticipating to what extent it would make those links on screen. But we'll talk about that in due course. But in it, the Doctor's up to something shifty. He appears to be in league with the Vardens, who are a race of angry Bakerfoil, essentially.
Who are they, Matt? Who are they?
We'll get onto that. It's a little bit vague who the Vardens are, or at least I didn't fully understand it.
I thought it was wrapped up beautifully.
Wrapped up, nice. I like it.
Okay,
Yeah, very good. Anyway, the Doctor appears to be in league with these creatures as he returns to Gallifrey to claim his title of president, which he ran away from at the end of the Deadly Assassin. He sort of commits a hostile takeover of Gallifrey in order to supposedly let the Vardens take control. But this is one of the sort of, I think, archetypal Doctor Who stories of two parts, because as soon as the Vardens have been seen off, and it turns out that the Doctor was attempting to trap them, there's a whopping great cliffhanger at the end of episode 4 where the Sontarans turn up to attempt to invade Gallifrey.
In a desperate attempt to up the ante and keep people interested for the next 2 episodes.
Well, and to extend the story for another 2 episodes. So it turns into the Sontarans invading Gallifrey. I think we've... I think certainly John has maybe previewed a few spicy opinions on this, but I mean, you've got to go easy on the guy. He only finished watching it a couple of hours ago, having been doing that classic pre-exam cram. But this is also
heat of opinion that's coming this way.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, let me turn it round, because I think I've given a sense that I don't like this.
All right, go on. I was just going to
Matt, why don't you give us your sense of it? Because I was thinking, watching this, actually, I was trying to find the good things in it, and I didn't find. I hated this.
Really?
I hated this.
Wow. Okay.
I hated it. I resented having to watch it. I resented every second that I was devoting to doing it. I was watching it on BritBox, which doesn't even have one of those 1.5 or 2 times functions, which, although it would have given this a decidedly Benny Hill aspect, especially, when they're running around fucking corridors in the TARDIS for most of the last episode, would have, you could have played yakety sax over it and it would have given a modicum of entertainment. I truly did not enjoy this, but I don't want to give away what I thought of it. You go first, Matt.
Okay, well, I think we've got an interesting conversation on our hands, because I loved this, and I went in totally expecting to hate this. I am not a massive fan of the Graham Williams era. I think he had an ambition to do much more sort of grandiose space opera. Much more so than the Hinchcliffe era beforehand, but I think the production limitations he was often working against, particularly with regard to inflation, and the also just I think just a general lack of quality control, particularly around sort of keeping Tom Baker on the leash, means that this era is not a favourite of mine. And I thought 6-parter season finale, the money's probably run out. You sort of know that it's big twist coming in episode 4 way in advance. So I was going in expecting to be thoroughly bored by this. And actually, I think this is flawed. I'm not going to make any great claims to be a masterpiece, for this to be a masterpiece, but it really held me because I
thought
he's
going to tell us.
I thought it was I just thought I'd leave it there. This was a much more interesting look at Gallifrey than I was expecting. Now, when we looked at the Deadly Assassin...
you don't even get a look at Gallifrey. They can't even muster up a fucking matte painting of the capital, for fuck's sake.
Yes, I mean, the whole look of the thing is fairly impoverished, and we'll get onto that shortly.
They keep pointing at it from the quarry.
It's over there, from the quarry.
If anything needed a special edition, it's this one, at least.
Well, there is a special edition on this one where they replace the Vardens with nice long, just like lines of CGI that go down and shimmer a bit. So I'll lend you that if you fancy rewatching this at any point.
Yeah, this is top of my rewatch list, Matt.
Top priority.
Go on, you tell us how it held you.
Well, so I remember when we were talking about the Deadly Assassin a few years ago, and we sort of discussed that it was a good Gallifrey story, but one of the things that it sort of has as a black mark against it is then all of the Gallifrey stories that follow, in terms of setting up the much more sort of politicised, starchy, kind of decadent version of the Time Lords versus the more godlike beings that had been beforehand. And I kind of felt that, having not seen the Invasion of Time at that point, I sort of bracketed that into this, but I was thinking very much of your Arcs of Infinity, your Trials of a Time Lord, all of these ones that come later where Time Lord society is still very much kind of portrayed through this very narrow prism of essentially skullduggery on the High Council and in the ruling classes, and it becomes, essentially Time Lord stories become sort of boardroom politics, really, which is an incredibly sort of boring approach to take. I thought this actually picked up the baton from Deadly Assassin pretty well, of showing quite a sort of decadent, crumbling empire that was sort of, I guess, just through weight of its own accumulated power, just about holding itself together, but was uniquely vulnerable. And I think actually showing the fact that this shows Gallifrey being invaded twice, and the sort of the political chaos that kind of unleashes, I thought was really
might
interesting.
be considered misfortune.
Yeah, but twice in one story. I genuinely think that is the point this is trying to make. You have all of these sort of slightly ridiculous, ineffectual Time Lords. Then you have the Castellan is the Milton Johns character, isn't it? Who's,
and fair dues, right? I mean, he does his thing. He does
right.
His
so
thing
Milton Johns
brilliantly.
does his thing, and I would love to know if he ever got frustrated by that. But it's like, it's almost like casting Milton Johns is almost like a shorthand in something now, in terms of like, exactly the sort of quizzling, oily, cowardly, like ass-kissing sort of character you're going to get, and he delivers that performance so well.
He's
It's
revolting, isn't he?
It's a pleasure to see how revolting he is in that role. Sucking up to everyone. First of all, the Doctor, and then Barusa, and then the Vardens when he thinks they're in charge. It's
his only known sustenance being the furniture around him.
It's amazing. So big shout out to Milton Johns in this. But also,
I'll give you that.
But also, I genuinely thought it was sort of cool and interesting to throw out the idea that the Time Lords are not the Time Lords are a faction of, or a society on Gallifrey, but there are other Gallifreyans there. So this idea, which is being introduced here, of this sort of underclass that are living in the wilderness, that are not Time Lords, that are sort of, don't have any part of the sort of privilege.
Or
of
the
that
ones
society.
going to a little bighorn fancy dress party.
Yeah, with all those sort of furs and bows and arrows and things. I thought, again, that is a new idea that it is putting on the table, and I thought it was sort of quite a productive one. But yeah, I thought it was interesting in that it definitely went a stage further than the Deadly Assassin, of basically saying this is a very powerful society through its own sort of inertia and accumulated power, but it's pretty fucked, and it's pretty vulnerable as well on multiple fronts. And I think, I mean, for me,
it's only vulnerable because the Doctor decides to defeat this inscrutable enemy by giving them everything that they want.
I mean, so the Doctor's plan makes no sense. I mean, this is like, and by the way, I'm not
whatsoever.
I am not trying to make any claims that this is a masterpiece. My line on this is that I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, but I also found it considerably more interesting than I thought I was going to as well. It is lumpy and all over the place, and it's way too long, and it's made in quite an impoverished way. And there are some terrible performances, and we'll get onto Leela's departure in a minute, because I think that's sort of worthy of its own discussion. But I don't know. I mean, I thought it added a few more layers to the idea of Gallifrey and to the idea of Time Lord society that I thought were dramatically worthwhile. I think the fact that, such is the constitutional inertia on Gallifrey that the Doctor is actually able to just turn up, and through invoking some constitutional rights is able to unleash absolute chaos on it. I think there's this idea that, like, at the heart of it, that these very overmighty empires that sort of presume in their that just sort of exist in this bubble of their own infallibility are inherently vulnerable. And in a sense, Gallifrey here is threatened by the Doctor, it's threatened by the Vardens, and then it's threatened by the Sontarans in the end. And they're sort of very lucky that actually no major devastation is caused during this. So, I mean, it doesn't... It suffers from all of the other problems of the Graham Williams era, in that no one really understands how to direct comedy, so there's some very leaden, funny bits. the banter with K9, for example, which should zing, and I think if it was directed with a bit more pace, probably would, but it just feels very sort of slow and isn't really going anywhere. But
well, they could have put a laughter track on it, I suppose, to help you guide the viewer as to where you were able to laugh, but you wouldn't have been able to hear it over K9's fucking motor.
I mean, that is quite deafening at this point, isn't it?
Oh, it's appalling. But I mean, no, seriously, Matt. No, I mean, look, I'll give you a couple of things.
You're not buying this. You're not buying this, I'm guessing.
Milton Johns, and I do agree that the kind of inscrutable and unguessable nature of Barusa's loyalties is quite nicely handled.
Oh yeah, I love the reveal when it turns out he has been sitting on the key all this time, because and I'm not sure whether it's clear that to me it wasn't quite clear whether that's something he has unilaterally decided to do because it would be safer, or whether that's.
I suspect if you look hard enough, he's probably sitting on the anal beads of Rassilon as well, and the cock ring of Rassilon.
There's a lot of, when they're listing off all the stuff of Rassilon that the Doctor gets given. You've got the coronet of Rassilon check, and you've got the wooden scarf thing,
the rod of Rassilon.
The rod of Rassilon. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a lot of stuff, Rassilon.
Yeah.
Let's not deny it. But yeah, I know. I mean, I thought. Again, I like the ambiguity of whether or not that was a sort of constitutional safeguard that they'd put in, that Barusa would hold the key, or whether it was something he was doing. But
no, but I mean, whatever. I mean, like we've discussed many times before how doing the Doctor as a git, when Baker, Colin takes over, in '84. Is just a bad idea. And I think having the Doctor blunder through the first 2 episodes of a 6-part serial being the bad guy, it's far less interesting than it should be, because it's so underwhelming, and because it's undercut so much by these attempts at humour that fall. I mean, there's a couple of camp old duffers talking to each other, but it's as nothing compared to the way that they're being interviewed or being discussed by the media, the news people, the journalists in Deadly Assassin. It's much cleverer the way it does that. I think there's a bit in a sauna or some sort of relaxation room in Deadly Assassin.
Yeah.
Where he ends up discussing with an aristocrat, and you realise how decrepit and think the whole thing is. This just has a couple of camp old duffers wandering around talking to each other. There's all that mugging about. Is everything that's so. I mean, this is seen as the class. If the Simpsons want to do a shorthand for Doctor Who, they have teeth, curls, and scarf. Right. This is the pretty much, certainly for the classic version of the show, this is the vision of Doctor Who that kind of pierces through into the general consciousness. And it's fascinating to get under the hood of it and see just how much of it was crud. And this is absolutely execrable. So much mugging about. All that crap between the Doctor and K9. Where you couldn't work out whether it was meant to be played for laughs or whether it was played for a dramatic moment or whether you're meant to be doubting his intentions. The final episode of running around the TARDIS is just the most interminable guff. It's just, when they go round third time round the same little bricked staircase, and sort of Leela's complaining about we've been here before, and it's like you and the fucking viewer, we've all had to sit through you walking around this thing time and time again. I mean, there's no dramatic beat to it. The characters that have been brought in, with the exception of the performances you get from John Arnott as Barusa and Milton Johns, as we've discussed, poor old Hilary Ryan playing Rodan, the bloody technician woman, or the savages from outside the Citadel, who sort of these dropped out bloody Time Lords that have decided to go and sit outside and dress like, I don't know, Marlon Brando in the 70s. It's just extraordinary. The Doctor's plan makes not a lick of sense. He's mugging at the camera. He signs a contract with the bad guys, gives them everything that they want so that he can trace where they're coming from. Just don't give them what they want.
Well, and
What
in
power are they
in
meant
that
to have?
context, the Sontarans plan actually makes even less sense because I'd always
Well, the Sontarans turn up and say, "Oh yeah, the Vardans, they were useful.
Yeah.
I'll give you this." There's in a six-parter that's absolutely filled with comedy that isn't funny, which is the worst thing you can do in drama.
Yes.
Comedy that isn't funny. There is one bit with Milton Johns where basically he's talking to the Sontarans, and they said, "Oh, did you meet the Vardans?" And he's, alas, all too brief. It's pretty much all in his delivery of it, but it's very funny. The Sontaran invasion crew is basically three blokes.
Yes. And those head masks are not looking good at this point.
No, they're definitely not looking great. It's pretty funny seeing the Sontaran sort of, the Sontarans have all had a few too many Mrs. Beaton's pork pies. They're thrashing
I do like the one that stacks it running around the swimming pool.
Yeah, there's that too. They're thrashing themselves against the bloody doors. The Doctor is in the TARDIS at one point trying to explain his actions, saying they were about to rampage through the universe. I had to stop them, but it's not clear why he had to get them so close to achieving their aims. I could go on. I will go on. The Time Lords who dropped out and as I say, dressed like Marlon Brando, thrashing around outside on rocks. Not clear. They don't even give them tents. There's no map painting of the Citadel to even. There's no sense of what that looks like from the outside. And I hear what you're saying about budget and inflation, but Christ alive, someone do something to give a sense of what that world is. But it all comes down to me to the plot, because it's not there in the characters. There's a little bit from the performance from Milton Johns. There's a little bit from the inscrutability of Barusa. All of that stuff, by the way, is done far, far better in Deadly Assassin.
Yeah.
And so what you're left with is plot. And this is meant to be a conspiracy thriller and a psychological thriller. It has nothing to compare with the psychotic sort of acid trip of the Doctor going into the Matrix in Deadly Assassin. That kind of...
Oh, to be clear, I think the Deadly Assassin is way better than this.
Not only roots it... let me finish. Not only roots it in the 70s and the experiences of people at the time, such that kind of weird acid trip, but also connects it to an era with Watergate going on and everything earlier in the decade, the real sense of political intrigue, conspiracy, decadence. There's nothing that is anywhere close to being as complex. This is a turgid watch. It runs over 6 never-ending episodes. And Dudley Simpson doesn't even bring his parping to what is, even by his standards, a very lackluster score. And because all of these things grind against each other, and I keep going back to it, but I think it's the beat that misses so badly, is the constant filling of time with mugging to camera and bits that are meant to be funny. And comedy that isn't funny is the worst thing that you can have in drama. And that means with all of these things misfiring, that you focus on the plot and you look for a plot and there ain't one there. The Doctor signs a contract with the bad guys to get them very close to power so that he can then whip it from them at the last moment. And then it turns out that the Vardans, who, when they're revealed, when they peel back the tinfoil, are revealed to be these kind of disco-cladded colonialists.
Yes.
They sort of look like, sort of pith helmet as designed by Boney M. It turns out the Sontarans were using them, but using them how? To what purpose? None of it makes a lick of sense, and it's just so long. It's just so long.
It is very long. I mean, to be honest, like the Sontaran element, it's like, I mean, that is an aspect of it for me that really doesn't work, because in a sense there's this idea that somehow they were behind it all along, whereas actually I think it would have been far more in keeping both of the Sontarans and sort of dramatically useful in terms of it being an oversight for the Doctor, as if, obviously the Doctor had to lower Gallifrey's defence shields. I quite like it if it was just a sort of opportunistic attack from the Sontarans, that they were passing through, saw that Gallifrey's defences were down and thought maybe they'd have a crack at taking over, which sort of would perhaps also go some way to sort of helping how disorganised their invasion actually seems to be.
I mean, Lewis is having a fair crack at finding some intellectual ballast. Ballast in, I suppose, the same way as, you know, when you're extremely pissed after a night out, you blunder into a drive-through McDonald's. It's that kind of ballast.
So this is regular viewer and guest contributor Lewis Baston, who's just started up a Doctor Who Twitter feed, hasn't he?
He has.
Which you should follow. Do you, by any chance, remember what that is, so people can go and follow his?
I will. Sorry, it's just that he's written. He's written in the chat. Lewis has written, I seem to recall that Terence Dix describes the appearance of the Vardens as disappointing in the novelisation. He's not wrong. But yeah, Lewis, he also says, he says, it's the later Roman Empire in it, not much constitutional safeguard against a mad emperor, barbarians at the gate, its culture dominated by memories and relics of a more vigorous republic. I mean, it is clearly that, or at least it's aiming for something along those lines. But I will only, you know, I think that, I think if that's meant to be a defence, Lewis, you are drowning and not waving, and I will be the one to remind you that on your Twitter designated for Doctor Who ramblings, which is Lewis Baston 5, Lewis, Lewis Baston 5, you said that you would, and I quote, watch this in solidarity with this, which I think gives a sense as to what Lewis really thinks of this.
Well, I mean, actually, this is quite a good segue to something.
Just in case there's any lack of clarity there, I don't think he likes it. And even if he says he likes it now in the chat, I don't care, because it's bad. This is some of the worst Doctor Who I've seen in a long, long time. Wow. I'm getting flashbacks of Kinder here. You know,
I'm fascinated that you and I had such a different experience with this.
This was no, and this isn't just. I know what you're thinking. He had to watch it in a rush in between doing lots of other things, and he only finished it 20 minutes beforehand, and that's never a good sign, John. And you know, I understand that some people might be thinking that, but this is really genuinely bad.
Yeah.
You know, this is. The sound of K9's motor at no care at any point was taken.
I mean, it is incredibly poorly made. I
appallingly
100%
made.
agree with you on this.
Let's talk about Leela staying on Gallifrey to...
Yes. I have. So this is obviously not particularly well regarded as a companion send-off. It was... Louise Jameson was hoping to be killed off. The production team felt that this might be a little bit too traumatising to the children that have grown to love Leela over the previous 2 seasons, perhaps sensibly. And so she is married off to a Gallifreyan guard who she has spent, maybe upwards of 2 minutes of screen time with prior to the episode. I think it goes without saying that this is perfunctory and doesn't work as a send-off. But it does get me into something which I did rate about this, which I'm sure John is about to roll his eyes at. I will say that I mean, I don't buy it for 1 second that Leela wants to stay on Gallifrey and settle down with Commander Andred or whatever his name is. But if you told me that Leela was going to stay on Gallifrey and go and have Doctor Companion style adventures with Rodan, I would believe you. Because that was something that surprisingly, and I'm sure John is going to stamp all over my head with this in about 5 seconds. But I thought the Leela Rodan dynamic was really interesting. I think it actually managed to sidestep some of the more problematic aspects of Leela's characterization as a savage trying to learn about things, which is touch and go previously by essentially kind of inverting that doctor-companion relationship, also inverting the class terms of it. So Rodan is this bored, sort of frustrated... Cosseted, very good word. Sort of time lord who has her eyes opened up to a different way of living by Leela, who gets to be dynamic and powerful and make the plan and sort of opens up this Time Lord's world a little bit. And I actually thought that was a really nice note. Weirdly, of all the things that it actually took me forward to, and again, not something I thought was particularly well executed in the new series, but I kind of got shades of, the idea of Clara going off and having her own adventures in a TARDIS with Maisie Williams at the end of, was it season 9?
That bad, huh?
Well, you didn't like that either, did you? No. But for me, I was very much there for the Leela-Rodan relationship. I thought it was interesting, and I can certainly
think of things you could film with those two that I would watch. But I know, in all seriousness, I think that's certainly the best of that Rodan character. It is the opening up of her eyes to that other world with Leela, and also her fixing the Doctor's TARDIS because he's incapable of doing it.
Yeah. But even that first scene where she sees Rodan and she's like sitting at her little computer, and she's kind of parroting the sort of Time Lord lore about non-intervention, and Leela is sort of within a few questions able to blow quite a few moral holes in that sort of.
Well, I do think Louise Jameson, as ever, frankly, is probably the best thing in this.
Yes,
I think
she
is so good at
rises wholly above what she's given to do in this and so many other serials. But it's like, yeah,
hugely. I don't know. I don't generally know her. The reputation of the character. I mean, I know that there's a lot of jokes. I sunk as low as that myself just a moment ago. As to the looks of the character and what she offers by way of titillation. I don't think perhaps enough has been said about just how good a performance it is, and how with her intuition is every bit as intellectual as the kind of faffing around with science stuff. She is essentially a psychological being rather than a scientific one, or one rooted in the Enlightenment. She's kind of an instinctive psychologist. Perhaps that's sort of contradictory to what I was saying about Enlightenment values, given that anyway. But that's a whole different can of beans. But the point is that she's an essentially kind of psychological human relations kind of person, and the way she reads people is effective, and she brings them into her. She gains their trust, and it's very. I would go for. I was going to say sweet, but it's not sweet. It's so loving and well and truly meant that she cannot conceive of the Doctor betraying her to the extent that even when he's being an absolute arse, she will say there must be a reason for it. And
that works really well, actually. I think mainly through her performance. In that,
yes, entirely through her performance.
Because the contortions that she puts herself through in order to understand why her friend is doing this, and the faith, as you say, that there must be something underpinning this. But
I don't believe it's faith, because if it were faith, if it were grounded in nothing. The thing that I think is so important about Leela is that she's such a good judge of character, and there is such a force behind her assessment of situations and people, that it isn't like some ditzy person who just airily hopes for the best. She has full conviction because she truly knows and believes the situation of her relationship with the Doctor. I think it's that trust. It's the only thing that really lands as an emotional beat. It's the only thing that really lands for me in the entire 6 episodes, which only makes it all the crueler that she just suddenly decides to hold hands with Robin Asquith or whoever it is, and stay on Gallifrey for no reason at all.
Well, I think we
less
agree.
Chemistry in that relationship than there is between Perry and Rakanos in Trial of a Time Lord, a serial we will discuss
soon.
We'll
discuss upcoming plans at the end of this show. But I fully agree that, to be honest, for all that there's, and from what I've read, Louise Jameson and the actor, I think it's Christopher Tranchell playing Andred. When they found out that their characters were to be paired off at the end of the story, they tried to at least put something into the performance to indicate that maybe to make it slightly less arbitrary. And you can certainly see that there's a few shots where they try and give each other a look or something, but
or just a tender glance or a tender touch or something.
To be honest, on the page, it would probably make as much sense for her to be paired off with Milton Johns as it would be for the other guy. But
I think that could have redeemed this. To be honest, I'd watch that. Yeah. The further adventures of Castellan Kellner and Leela. With him just, maybe we should, I would counsel caution, and then trying to stab her in the back and her sort of just killing him with a glance. I'd pay good money to watch that.
Big Finish, if you're listening. But
I can't recommend that anybody watch this. I would go as far as to say that I would recommend people not to watch this. You will end up infuriated and hating a much loved era of the show. I loathed Tom Baker's performance in this. I loathed him. I resented those hours spent at the bloody Coach and Horses in Soho on the licence fee, pay a dime, looking at this arrogant prick, not acting with any great quality, which I know he can do. Not bringing any charm to it, which I know he can do, mugging around, toothing it up, playing for laughs but without landing them. It's an appalling caricature. It's kind of like if you were doing some sort of send-up of what's shit about 70s Doctor Who, you'd more or less have that kind of thing that people are thinking about. And now, I mean, we haven't talked about him much. I think his performance is truly terrible throughout. And I don't say that with any pleasure, because I had to sit through 6 episodes of it, and there was no pleasure to be found in that. But I know he can do better, and so I was disappointed. Do you know what? I'm not even angry anymore. I'm disappointed.
Hey, an unexpected scene, so get busy with the fizzy with Soda Stream. Big or small, get busy with the fizzy, short or tall. Crave a fizzy flavor with water from the tap. Press the magic button, shake it, just voila. Mix a little mixer, add a little dash. No trouble with the bubbles, splish a little splash. It's an endless stream, so get busy with the fizzy, Soda Stream. That's fizzy.
I feel like
another thing.
I feel that clip probably comes without context slightly, because we didn't actually get to talking about Derek Deadman's extraordinary performance as Sontaran Commander Storr in there. But maybe
he was a bit Gore-Blimey Governor, wasn't he?
He was a little bit, but that was Derek Deadman in that SodaStream advert. But look, to be honest, I'm sure we wouldn't have found much more.
I think the Sontarans are the least of it, really.
Right. So that's it for another episode of I'll Explain Later. If you were worried that we were going down the cozy consensus route about everything, we've blown that wide open with our vicious debate about the invasion of time.
I like you less as a result of this, Matt.
Well, can you see your way to returning to the live stream to talk about some Doctor Who that I'm sure will be far less polarising next time around?
No, so I suspect we'll both agree about much of it.
So we are in the unique position of actually being able to plan ahead this time in terms of planning what our next show is, and we are
purely because we've given it some thought.
Purely because we gave it some thought, and I'm just looking at my calendar to remind myself of the date we agreed to do this. So the next live show will be on Tuesday, the 27th of April at 8 p.m, the usual time of 8 p.m. And we will have another live episode of I'll Explain Later, but we're going to be doing something slightly different next time. We're going to be devoting the whole show to a single story, and we will be looking at this bad boy in all its glory. So it will be all 14 episodes of The Trial of a Time Lord We will watch
And
them.
if you think I was vexed after 6 episodes of The Invasion of Time...
If you thought John didn't like Tom
wait.
Baker, you just wait till you've seen him go to town on this. So I'm really excited because this will be a glorious opportunity to watch this cheaply made piece of SD video from the mid-80s upscaled onto Blu-ray in all its glory. And I may just watch the extended version of Terror of the Vervoids. Who knows? I might subject myself to that for your pleasure. So it's a Trial of a Time Lord special. It's the trial of a Time Lord, live on Twitch right here on Tuesday the 27th of April at 8 p.m. Please join us with your views on Trial of a Time Lord. And, of course, as per usual, the episode will go up as a regular podcast a day later.
Although with any luck, most of our viewers will, if they do stream in live, they'll be doing so from the heavily blotto from the table of a pub garden.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do an episode from a pub garden. That would be...
I think that would be kind of the offshoot, wouldn't it? You know, so Doctor Who had Doctor Who Confidential. It'd be I'll Explain Later from the pub garden. The kind of like, you know, where we decompress and go behind the scenes of what makes I'll Explain Later really tick.
I'll explain later.
Yeah.
Well, so that is the plan. So hopefully we will see you there on the 27th of April, and if not for the podcast afterwards. In the meantime, if you enjoy the show and continue to enjoy the show, I mean,
it's quite unlikely,
and it's quite unlikely. We'd be quite surprised. But please do continue to leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, star ratings. That's all very helpful. We were thrilled to get our first ever negative review a couple of weeks ago, but by someone who also left it under a 5-star rating. So our extremely high average is our batting average has not been taking a hit.
I am using that everywhere now. I'll explain later. Once great.
Once great.
That was the review. Once great. Obviously now less. Now not.
I'm not entirely sure I disagree, to be honest, but there we go.
No.
But any comments or...
It's like every letter in Viz writing in that it was it's not as funny as it used to be.
Or cancelling your subscription. Yeah.
It's Private Eye. Yeah. It's very much along those lines.
So if you've got positive things to say about the podcast, please do so in the Apple Podcast review section. But we do welcome a whole range of views in our email inbox, hello@I'llExplainLater.com. John mans our Twitter feed, @ExplainLaterPod. We are probably less active on Facebook, but we do check in there from time to time, facebook.com/I'llExplainLater.
I've got to say this for our listeners, and you know, they're a varied crowd. They're not a varied crowd, but they're a great bunch, and I've had to refer very, very few of them to Prevent. So I regard that as you know, they're a cut above.
Whereas the mountain of evidence you've accumulated for yourself as part of doing this show is quite
people only
else.
have to listen to know who I am.
Absolutely. So yes, do you have any further business, John?
No. I'm only to say that our Antipodean listeners can Google Prevent to find out what that is that I just referenced. Though doing so will, of course, bring you under the radar of GCHQ. So just bear that in mind.
Well, is it? Yes. All for understanding a joke on a Doctor Who podcast hardly seems worth it. But anyway,
I fear that our audience are the kind of people who would want to know what the joke meant, so I'll throw them a bone.
Right, we're going to clock off now.
What was I saying about comedy that isn't funny?
I don't know, John.
The worst thing you can do.
Anyway, we'll see you on the 27th for the trial of a Time Lord. But otherwise, take care. We'll see you again soon.
Ciao for now.